Welcome back to the channel to this brief journey into the history of the 1917 British one penny. A remarkable coin born during the challenging years of World War I. This penny carries the portrait of King George V and the iconic image of Britannia, symbolizing the strength and pride of the British Empire. Struck in bronze at a time of national hardship and metal shortages, it served as an essential part of everyday life for millions. Today, the 1917 penny stands as a small yet powerful reminder of Britain's wartime economy, artistic heritage, and enduring resilience. Top 5 First up. The 1917 British one penny is a fascinating coin that reflects a period of immense change in the United Kingdom, both economically and politically. Struck during the height of World War I, the 1917 penny emerged at a time when Britain was facing enormous financial pressure to fund the war. As a result, the Royal Mint was producing vast quantities of coinage to maintain smooth commercial activity, while also meeting the demands of the wartime economy. The penny remained one of the most important denominations in everyday life, used for everything from basic food purchases to wages for working-class citizens. Even though wartime shortages affected many industries, the Royal Mint continued to strike bronze pennies in significant numbers to keep the country's monetary system functioning. Design-wise, the 1917 penny continued the traditional style that had been used since the beginning of King George V's reign in 1911. On the obverse, the coin features the left-facing portrait of King George V, designed by the well-known engraver Bertram. The portrait is accompanied by the Latin inscription VDEIGRA, Rex Fid, Def Ind, Imp, meaning George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. This inscription highlights the vast reach of the British Empire during the early 20th century. The reverse depicts Britannia, the female personification of Britain, seated with her trident and shield, a symbol of British maritime strength and national pride. This design, created by Leonard Charles, had appeared on pennies since 1860 and remained a powerful patriotic emblem, especially during the wartime period. The materials and minting process of the 1917 penny also hold historical significance. The coin was struck in bronze, a mixture of copper, tin, and zinc. However, during World War I, the supply of metals became increasingly difficult, and the bronze alloy used in earlier years was gradually adjusted to cope with shortages. Even with these challenges, the Royal Mint produced tens of millions of pennies in 1917, making the coin quite common in circulation at the time. Despite high production numbers, well-preserved examples today can be valuable to collectors, particularly those in high grade such as uncirculated condition, because most coins of the era saw heavy use and wear. Another interesting aspect of the 1917 penny's history involves the circulation of counterfeit coins. During the wartime economy, there was a rise in illegal production of bronze pennies because the sheer demand for small change made it easier for fakes to blend in. Although most counterfeiters aimed for profit rather than perfect accuracy, many forged pieces circulated widely. Therefore, modern collectors often examine the details of a 1917 penny, such as weight, lettering, and quality of metal, to distinguish genuine Royal Mint pieces from worn or poorly made forgeries. Over time, the 1917 penny remained in circulation for several decades, surviving through the post-war recession, the economic turbulence of the 1920s and 1930s, and even World War II. It was finally withdrawn as Britain prepared for decimalization in the 1960s and early 1970s. Today, the 1917 penny stands not only as a collectible coin, but also as a historical artifact that connects us directly with the everyday life and economic struggles of the First World War period. Its design, production, and long circulation life capture a vivid picture of Britain during a defining moment in world history. Next up, the 1920 United Kingdom one penny is a fascinating coin from the reign of King George V, struck during a period when the British Empire was undergoing profound economic, political, and social change. The penny remained one of the most heavily used denominations in everyday life, and coins like the 1920 penny circulated widely across Britain's shops, markets, factories, and public transport systems. By 1920, the design of the penny had already become iconic. On the obverse appears the left-facing portrait of King George V, created by the engraver Bertram, showing the king in a dignified and realistic style that was admired for its balance between simplicity and authority. Surrounding his portrait is the Latin legend VDEIGRA, Rex Fid, Def Ind, Imp, which translates to George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. This title reflects the global reach of the British Empire in the early 20th century, at a time when Britain governed vast territories around the world. The reverse of the 1920 penny features the classic figure of Britannia, seated and facing right, holding a trident in one hand and a shield in the other. This design had been in continuous use on British pennies since 1860 and symbolized Britain's naval power, stability, and imperial identity. Britannia's image was intended to evoke a sense of national pride, linking modern Britain with its Roman past. The date 1920 appears below, framed by the circular bead border typical of the pre-decimal coinage. Though visually similar to pennies minted decades earlier, the 1920 issue stands at an interesting transitional moment in numismatic history, because Britain had just begun altering the metal composition of its silver coins due to rising costs after World War I, while the penny itself continued to be made from 95.5% copper, along with small proportions of tin and zinc. The broader changes in coinage reflect the economic strains of the era, including wartime inflation and post-war recovery. In everyday British life, the 1920 penny played a vital role. It was used to buy newspapers, tram fares, small household items, sweets, and food. Many working-class families depended heavily on copper coins in their weekly budgeting, and wages were often counted out in pennies, threepence pieces, and shillings. Children collected and traded pennies, and they were commonly used in slot machines, cigarette machines, and public telephones. Because they circulated so heavily, pennies from this era often show signs of wear, and collectors especially value well-preserved examples. The Royal Mint produced a substantial number of pennies in 1920, but high-quality specimens, particularly those with sharp detail, smooth surfaces, and even a hint of original mint luster, are far less common today due to the coin's heavy circulation. Historically, the 1920 penny is also significant because it represents Britain during a time of transition. World War I had ended only 2 years earlier, leaving the country with economic challenges, social upheaval, and shifting political attitudes. King George V, whose portrait appears on the coin, was navigating the complexities of a changing empire, the rise of Irish independence movements, and emerging pressures for democratic reforms. Although these events may seem distant from the small copper penny, coins often reflect their times through symbolism, production choices, and national identity. The 1920 penny embodies Britain's attempt to maintain stability and continuity during a period marked by global conflict, post-war reconstruction, and the gradual modernization of society. Collectors today appreciate the 1921 penny not only as a piece of currency but as a historical artifact. It connects the holder to everyday life in early Britain, to the reign of George V, and to the traditions of British craftsmanship and iconography. Whether found in old family collections, antique shops, or specialist auctions, the 1920 penny continues to carry the charm and authenticity of a bygone era, making it an important and beloved part of British numismatic history. Here is one more long paragraph about the 1920 UK 1 penny coin, adding more depth to its historical and cultural background. Another fascinating aspect of the 1921 penny is the way it reflects the changing technologies and minting practices of the early 20th century. By this time, the Royal Mint had improved its machinery, allowing coins to be struck with greater consistency and precision than in previous decades. Yet despite these advancements, many 1920 pennies still show small variations in strike quality, alignment, and surface finish, details that collectors study closely today. The copper alloy used in pennies often darkened naturally over time, developing a deep brown or chocolate-toned patina that many enthusiasts consider attractive and authentic. Some examples also show subtle hints of red or golden tones, especially if they were stored carefully after minting. These natural color changes help numismatists estimate a coin's originality and history of handling. The 1920 penny also circulated through a world that was rapidly modernizing. Electricity was spreading through British cities, motorcars were becoming more common, radio broadcasting was beginning, and new industries were emerging. As people carried these pennies in their pockets, the coin silently witnessed a society shifting from Victorian traditions into a modern age, making it not only a unit of currency but a small storyteller of technological and cultural evolution. Next up, the 1929 United Kingdom 1 penny is a fascinating coin from the later period of King George V's reign. By 1929, Britain was still recovering from the lingering economic effects of the First World War, and its currency reflected the traditions of the Victorian and Edwardian eras. The penny at this time was made of bronze, a metal introduced for penny coins in 1860, replacing the earlier copper issues. The alloy typically consisted of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, giving the coin its rich reddish-brown tone when freshly struck. The size remained large compared to modern coins, approximately 30.8 mm diameter and weighing around 9.45 grams, making it a substantial coin in the hand. On the obverse of the 1929 penny is the portrait of King George V, designed by Sir Bertram. This portrait shows the king facing left, wearing no crown, with a dignified and realistic appearance. The inscription around the portrait reads VDEIGRA, Rex Fid Def IND, Imp, which translates to George V. by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. This long Latin legend reflects the vast scope of the British Empire at that time. Mackinall's portrait had been in use since 1911 and is considered one of the most admired royal effigies due to its classical artistic style. The reverse side of the coin features the iconic figure of Britannia, a symbol used on British pennies since 1672. She is shown seated facing right, wearing a Corinthian helmet and holding a trident in her left hand. Beside her is a shield decorated with the Union flag, representing Britain's naval strength and national identity. The date 1929 appears below the seated figure. This design, created by Leonard Charles, had remained largely unchanged for decades and became an emblem of British coinage. The 1929 issue continues this classic tradition shortly before it would disappear entirely with the introduction of the new designs under George VI. In terms of mintage and usage, the 1929 penny was produced in large quantities because pennies were essential for everyday transactions, buying food, riding buses, paying for newspapers, and countless small purchases. Although exact numbers vary by source, millions of these coins were struck at the Royal Mint. They circulated widely across Britain, remaining in everyday use for decades. Many 1929 pennies stayed in circulation until the historical shift to decimalization in 1971, meaning these coins often show extensive wear from decades of handling. The historical context of this coin is equally significant. In 1929, Britain was entering a period of economic uncertainty with the approach of the Great Depression after the Wall Street crash. Despite this, the Royal Mint maintained stable production of bronze pennies partly because they were so essential to daily financial life. The coin also belongs to the final phase of George V's coinage. He would pass away in 1936, bringing an end to an era of stable, traditional British coin design. The 1929 penny represents a moment in time when the British Empire was still vast, the monarchy was deeply respected, and coinage remained strongly linked to long-standing traditions. Today, the 1929 penny is valued by collectors not because it is rare, most examples are common, but because it is a well-preserved piece of British history. Collectors often look for coins in uncirculated or near-mint condition, which are far harder to find due to the heavy circulation these coins experienced. A beautifully preserved 1929 penny with full detail, sharp edges, and original mint luster can command a much higher price than a worn example. As a historical object, the coin offers a tangible connection to early Britain, its society, its economy, and its long-standing artistic traditions in coin design. Another important aspect of the 1929 British penny is the way it reflects the everyday life and culture of the people living during the late 1920s. At that time, the penny was more than just small change, it was an essential part of Britain's economic rhythm. A single penny could buy a postcard, a bus ticket for a short journey, or a handful of sweets from a shop counter. Children often collected pennies in small metal money boxes, and many working-class families budgeted their weekly expenses down to the last few coins. Because of its size and weight, the penny was easy to handle and immediately recognizable by touch alone. Its presence in pockets, purses, and shop tills gave it a kind of cultural familiarity that modern coins no longer have. In addition, coins like the 1929 penny circulated far beyond Britain, reaching ports, colonies, and trading posts throughout the empire. Sailors, merchants, and travelers carried these pennies with them, meaning a coin struck in London could eventually end up in distant corners of the world. This deep, everyday connection, combined with its classic Britannia design, makes the 1929 penny not just a numismatic item but a small, enduring symbol of British heritage and daily life between the wars. Next up, the 1935 UK 1 penny is a bronze coin struck during the reign of King George V, a monarch whose coinage marked the final era of traditional British pennies before major design changes arrived later with George VI and Elizabeth II. The penny had been a key denomination in British currency for centuries, forming part of the pre-decimal system in which 240 pennies equaled a pound. By 1935, the British Empire was still intact, and coins carried strong symbolic imagery that reflected both national identity and imperial reach. The 1935 penny was produced near the end of George V's reign, just 1 year before his death, making it one of the later issues of his long and historically significant coinage period. The obverse front of the 1935 penny features a portrait of King George V designed by the sculptor Bertram. This effigy is known for its dignified realism, portraying the king in a left-facing profile with a short beard and a calm, composed expression. Around the portrait appears the legend, VDEIGRA, Rex Vid Def Ind, Imp, which stands for George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. This inscription reflects Britain's global imperial status at the time, when India and vast territories across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific were under British rule. Coins from this period therefore serve not only as currency but as miniature historical documents capturing the worldview and political identity of the era. The reverse back of the coin depicts Britannia, the long-standing female allegorical figure representing Britain's strength, endurance, and maritime heritage. Britannia is shown seated with her trident, shield, and helmet, facing left as waves ripple beneath her. This design had been used on pennies since 1860 and became one of the most iconic images in British numismatic history. It symbolized naval power and the island nation's strategic command of the seas. The reverse also includes the date 1935 and the word one penny forming part of the design. The imagery remained unchanged throughout George V's reign, giving these coins a sense of continuity and stability during a time of great global shifts, including World War I, the rise of new political movements, and economic turbulence. In terms of composition, the 1935 penny was struck in bronze, specifically a mixture of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. It weighed 9.4 grams and measured 31 millimeters in diameter, making it a large coin compared to modern pennies. The size and weight of pre-decimal pennies were significant because they were designed for everyday handling in shops, markets, and factories at a time when cash transactions dominated economic life. The coin's solid feel made it durable and resistant to wear, which is why many examples from 1935 survive today in varying conditions, from heavily worn pieces once used in daily commerce to beautifully preserved coins kept by collectors. The year 1935 itself holds an interesting place in British history. It was the Silver Jubilee year of King George V, marking his 25th year on the throne. Although the celebration did not alter the standard penny design, the atmosphere of national pride and gratitude for the king's service makes coins from this period particularly meaningful to enthusiasts. Special commemorative coins were issued for the Jubilee, but the penny retained its traditional imagery. As such, the regular 1935 penny represents continuity amidst celebration, blending everyday utility with the historical spirit of the Jubilee year. Collectors today view the 1935 penny as a common but historically rich coin. It is not rare because millions were minted, yet it remains highly valued for its connection to the final years of George V and the old British imperial era. Its traditional Britannia design and classic bronze composition make it a favorite among those interested in pre-decimal coinage. Well-preserved examples with clear details and minimal wear are more desirable, especially in uncirculated condition. For many people, holding a 1935 penny is like holding a piece of British social and political history, a small artifact from a world that was on the verge of profound transformation as the century unfolded. The 1935 penny also reflects the broader economic climate of Britain during the interwar years. After the devastation of World War I, Britain spent much of the 1920s and early 1930s trying to rebuild its economy. By 1935, the nation was emerging from the Great Depression, and although unemployment was still high in many industrial regions, signs of recovery were beginning to appear. Coins like the penny were central to everyday life in a society where wages were low and small denominations mattered greatly. Workers, shopkeepers, bus conductors, and schoolchildren all handled pennies daily, making them one of the most culturally familiar objects of the time. The 1935 penny, therefore, provides insight into the daily rhythm of British life in the mid-1930s, when every coin carried real purchasing power, often used to buy newspapers, bread, milk, or transport fares. Another layer of the penny's significance lies in the technological aspects of its minting. The Royal Mint, responsible for producing British coinage, had developed advanced methods of striking bronze coins by the early century. Each 1935 penny was made using hardened steel dies that impressed the design onto blank bronze discs with immense pressure. These techniques ensured consistency in the details of Britannia and King George V's portrait, although small variations still occurred due to die wear, production batches, and minor design refinements. Collectors today often study these small differences, such as subtle changes in lettering, spacing, or relief depth, which can provide clues about production runs and minting practices in the 1930s. This makes the 1935 penny not only a historical piece, but also an object of technical interest within numismatics. In addition to its economic and technological context, the 1935 penny occupies a symbolic place in the story of the British monarchy. King George V was widely respected for his calm leadership during World War I and for maintaining stability through politically tense times, including the rise of socialism, the Irish question, and colonial unrest. His coinage is often associated with reliability and tradition. By 1935, his health was deteriorating, and the nation was aware that a transition was approaching. The penny from this year captures the end of an era. Shortly after his death in January 1936, Britain entered a period of monarchic turmoil marked by the abdication of Edward VII and the subsequent accession of George VI. Thus, the 1935 penny represents the final stable chapter of the George V period before a sequence of dramatic royal events reshaped the monarchy's public image. The physical condition of surviving 1935 pennies also tells a story. Many examples show heavy wear, indicating long circulation through the years leading up to and including World War II. These coins passed through the hands of soldiers, factory workers, evacuees, and families coping with wartime rationing. Some pennies even circulated into the 1950s and 1960s because pre-decimal currency remained in use until 1971. This means that the life of a single 1935 penny could easily span more than 3 decades, witnessing social change from the Depression era to post-war reconstruction and the emergence of modern Britain. Each scratch, mark, or worn detail on such a coin reflects countless anonymous transactions and personal stories now lost to time. Lastly, the cultural memory of the penny, especially the large bronze pennies like the 1935 type, endures strongly in British nostalgia. Many older people recall using these coins in childhood, often keeping a penny as a token of the past after decimalization retired them in 1971. Today, collectors appreciate the 1935 penny for its artistry, its historical weight, and its connection to a vanished monetary system. Although not rare or extremely valuable, it remains beloved because it represents a tangible piece of British heritage. The combination of imperial imagery, royal symbolism, and everyday practicality makes the 1935 penny a unique coin that bridges history, economy, and national identity. Holding it is like glimpsing a moment from nearly a century ago, a reminder of how simple objects can preserve the story of an entire era. Next up, the 1936 United Kingdom 1 penny coin holds a special place in British numismatic history, not only because it comes from the final year of King George V's reign, but also because it marks the beginning of a turbulent period known as the Year of the Three Kings. The penny of this year was struck during a moment of political uncertainty and royal transition, giving it historical value far beyond its face worth. These coins were minted at the Royal Mint in London and formed part of the long-running series of large bronze pennies that had been in circulation since 1860. They were produced using the same traditional bronze alloy of copper, tin, and zinc, and featured the classic seated Britannia design that had symbolized British strength on coinage for generations. At the beginning of 1936, the penny still carried the portrait of King George V, who had ruled since 1910 and whose effigy had become a familiar sight on British coins. His portrait, designed by Sir Bertram, is shown facing left, wearing a crown and surrounded by the Latin inscription Videigra Rex Fid, Def, Ind, Imp, George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. These coins were struck only for a short time early in the year because King George V passed away on 20 January 1936, bringing his long and stable reign to an end. This meant that most of the 1936 pennies bear his portrait, and these coins represent the final issue of pennies in his name. The political atmosphere changed dramatically after the death of George V. His eldest son became King Edward VII, but his reign lasted only a few months due to the constitutional crisis caused by his desire to marry Wallis Simpson. While patterns and trial designs for Edward VII coins were created, no regular circulating 1936 penny was ever issued with his portrait. This makes the year 1936 historically remarkable. Even though Edward VII reigned during part of that year, none of the pennies show his profile. Collectors value this fact because it symbolizes how unusual and short-lived his rule was, and it adds a sense of rarity to any surviving patterns or trial pieces, though those are held mostly by museums and rarely by private collectors. After Edward VII abdicated in December 1936, his brother ascended the throne as King George VI. However, by that time the Royal Mint had already produced all circulating pennies for the year with the portrait of George V, and it was too late to mint new pennies for the end of the year. Therefore, no 1936 penny exists with the portrait of George VI, even though he was king for the final days of the year. The next official issue would come in 1937, bearing his effigy. This makes the 1936 penny unique. It is a coin dated in a year when Britain had 3 kings, yet it portrays only the first. The reverse design of the 1936 penny continued the long-established theme of Britannia, seated with shield and trident, a design originally created by Leonard Charles in the 19th century. It reflects the artistic tastes of the Victorian era but remained in use well into the century because of its cultural symbolism. The inscription simply reads 1 penny, with the date 1936 at the bottom. These coins were relatively well struck and made in significant quantities, meaning they are not rare in low-grade condition. However, well-preserved examples, especially those with strong detail and minimal wear, are highly sought after by collectors who appreciate both the coin's historical context and its classic design. Today, the 1936 penny remains a popular item among collectors of British coinage. While most examples are affordable, the coin's deeper significance lies not in rarity but in the dramatic events of 1936, a year that witnessed the death of one king, the abdication of another, and the accession of a third. It represents the final chapter of George V's coinage and the last time his portrait appeared on a penny. For many enthusiasts, the 1936 penny is more than a simple bronze coin. It is a symbol of a turning point in British royal history, a relic of a year marked by change, uncertainty, and the end of a long and respected reign. As the 1936 penny moved through circulation, it became part of the daily life of millions across the British Empire. These coins were used constantly in shops, markets, buses, trams, and post offices, making them a familiar object in the hands of ordinary people. Because the penny was one of the lowest denominations, it experienced heavy wear, which is why finding well-preserved 1936 pennies today is more challenging than it seems. During this period, Britain was still dealing with the economic effects of the Great Depression, and many working-class families relied on every small coin to manage expenses. The penny had significant purchasing power at the time. It could buy a newspaper, a loaf of bread at certain bakeries, or a child's sweets. In many ways, the 1936 penny represents not only royal history, but also the social and economic world of everyday British citizens. In addition to its historical and cultural significance, the 1936 penny also attracts attention from numismatists because of its position at the end of a major design era. The large bronze penny series, which had begun in the reign of Queen Victoria, was slowly approaching its end. By the century, changing economic conditions and the rising cost of metals would force the Royal Mint to rethink the size and composition of lower denomination coins. This makes the 1936 penny part of the final phase of the classic big penny tradition, large, heavy, and instantly recognizable. For collectors, it serves as a bridge between old-world Victorian design and the modern coinage changes that followed under George VI and later Elizabeth. Its enduring popularity reflects how a simple bronze coin can carry layers of history, from royal transitions to shifts in everyday British life and evolving minting practices.